He is going to be in the dark. Didn't want anybody to see him, but he's not going to talk to us. Richard, you're on, sir.
My fellow Americans, I have come here to tell you about my life. I am Richard Milhouse Nixon. I wanted to tell you all about me, all the things that I've done, my life, my accomplishments, my successes, and my failures. This is because I influenced American politics for 30 years, from 1946 to 1976. And I know the number of people here are just curious about me or still harbor anger and resentment toward me. I get that. So, I won't offer you any pity. I won't ask for give you any pity, any forgiveness, nor will I give you any bull. Instead, I just ask for your patience to listen to my story, as I have quite a story to tell you. I was born January 9th, 1913, second oldest of 4 other brothers. We lived here in Yorba Linda, California, about 35 miles southeast of LA, about 12 miles from Whittier, California, and we lived in a Quaker community. My dad, Frank, or Francis, owned a small gas station, small citrus farm where we grew lemon trees, and a small grocery store. And he was abusive. My mom, Hannah Milhouse, was a Quaker and instilled a lot of wonderful ideas in me, like to be racially tolerant, to have a great education, to be ambitious and hardworking, and a love for music. And she was controlling. So as a kid, I pretended to be the good kid to devise plots to go around them. And we grew up rather poor also. At age 9, my aunt taught me how to play piano, and we lived in this house, which became a lifelong passion. We lived in this house, my dad built, and I saw my parents work hard but not get very far. So I took ambition to the next level. And this to really please my mom, which became the Oedipus complex that would later turn upside down. By the time I was 20, 2 of my brothers had died. Went to high school in Whittier, was on the football team. My coach called me scrap iron because I kept getting knocked down and would come right back up again over and over. But one thing I noticed in football or any other sport is that the person who has the ball controls the game for that time period, which fascinated me. I graduated from Whittier High in 34, was second best in my class, and got a scholarship to go to Harvard, but I had to turn it down because I couldn't afford the living expenses. So I went to local and nearby Whittier College, where I excelled in drama, debating, and athletics. As many would say, I was verbally gifted. I worked in my dad's grocery store to pay tuition, and then I got a scholarship to Duke University, Duke Law School, to become a lawyer. Went there for a couple of years, graduated from there in 37, came back to Whittier to practice law, and got involved in area community theater, where I met Pat Ryan, a fellow amateur actress, and we were married in 1940. And then wanted to move to Washington, D.C., to work for the Office of Price Administration. So Pat and I moved there, but actually I got tired of the New Deal policies and all the government overreach and regulations they had. So I joined the Navy in 42, quit that job and joined the Navy. There I was in the Pacific Theater and worked as a logistics support officer and got to the rank of lieutenant. I stopped doing this in 46, and I came back to Whittier to practice law, where I was approached by Republican businessmen and politicians who wanted me to run for Congress. They said I'd run against Jerry Burhorst, the 5-time Democratic incumbent, and was a New Dealer. He had a hard time starting up his campaign in that August of 46. So I took advantage of the time, and I made it personal about him, about my ideas. I took a scorched earth policy. I'd say it was soft on communism and was connected to communist-linked organizations, and he was out of touch with his constituents. I won by 56% of the vote. I became a congressman and an anti-communist crusader, and you bet I had a problem with being communists and anything associated with the Soviet Union and any groups they're with them, because they are godless, they are classless, they have usually a dictator who suppresses all freedoms like freedom of religion, speech, and the press, which is what we have here. They have a collective society where you work for the common good. No one owns anything, and no matter how hard you work, you can't rise above in your rank. You can't be an individual, because you're always working like a drone worker in a beehive. This stifles individualism. And I didn't want them to get Oppenheimer's bomb. That was my problem with them. Because of my ideas, I was put on some committees, and in the meantime, I was living the dream. Pat and I have two girls, Tricia and Julie, 46, 48, and you can see how happy I am with my kids. And the women in my life calmed me down and gave me peace in the hectic world I lived in. Because of my views, I was put on the HUAC committee, the House of Un-American Activities Committee. They wanted to find out any communists that were working in our federal government, weed them out. So at this point, I had information on Alger Hiss, who we think was involved with the party and had committed perjury doing this. So I intensely grilled him on the House floor. This was heard by millions of people on the radio. We found him guilty. He spent 44 months in prison. And this is how I got my name across. Another man came to this committee, Ronald Reagan. He was president of SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. He was complaining how communists had infiltrated Hollywood and were causing and threatening strikes, making Hollywood lose money. And our, Reagan's and I, careers, and especially our thinking, would dovetail over the next couple of decades. And this set the template, BTW, for the Army McCarthy hearings in '54, where Senator Joseph McCarthy went ballistic and had a committee to find out who else was involved in the Communist Party, just based on hearsay and innuendo. Dozens of careers were ruined because of people appearing on this committee, and they were blacklisted in all different types, besides the government. This related to actors, screenwriters. This related to intellectuals and people, sympathizers of the Communist Party. And this also led to some horror movies back in the 1950s, where, remember those campy films from this time period, where ugly monsters were invading our society. These monsters were really metaphors for communists coming in and trying to mess up our ideas and our life. John Birch Society also started at this time about crazy ideas about communism through the fluoridation of water. Getting back to my story, in 1950 a Senate seat opened up in California. And because of my fame, I decided to go for this, and I'd be up against the most liberal progressive Democrat of all, Helen Gahagan Douglas. And she considered our HUAC committee to be downright not democratic and specifically fascist. And I didn't like it. That pissed me off. So what I did was I started to resort some tricks. I played nasty. I got some pink sheets and listed all her campaign ideas on them, because pink equaled girl and commie. And I compared her voting record to that of Vito Marcantonio, a New York rep who was the most socialist person of the day. And I made this campaign really ugly, nasty, and dirty, which got me the moniker Tricky Dick. You see, when my default settings, this is because when there's evidence that's scant and almost non-existent, my default settings kick in, which means allegations, rumors, innuendos, and outright lies. I wanted to appeal to the raw emotions of the public, because I know you vote with your heart. This happened in 1933 in Germany. That's how the fascists came to power. Happened in my day, and happened in your day with psychotic, insane, and outlandish conspiracy theories promoted by clubs here in the villages. So I weaponize my words and use them like swords and daggers. And when I see an opening, I thrust and I foil, and when I make contact, I watch my opponents bleed out in front of me as I assassinate my opponents with words. Because the end justifies the means. So Machiavelli and Malcolm X were both right. And that you do whatever it takes to win, by whatever means necessary, to win, to gain control, and to keep that football. I won by 180,000 votes. So, hey Helen baby, next time, bring it. Go big or go home. This got the attention of me being senator by Dwight Eisenhower running for president in '52. He chose me for his running mate for 4 reasons. First, I was young. I was about to turn 40. Second, people knew me from the HUAC committee. Third, I make a perfect attack dog, which is what VPs do on the campaign trail. And like a junkyard dog, I'd attack anything in my way. And fourth, I'd help consolidate votes from the South and West. Despite, in the fall, things went well until the fall. Despite being this communist crusader, standing up for truth, justice, and the American way, it was found out I had a secret slush fund that I was using from campaign contributions for my own personal use. So, to put out this fire, I went on national TV and gave what is called the Checker speech. And in that speech, I said I'd return all campaign contributions, but keep the dog Checker as a Cocker Spaniel because our family fell in love with it. Well, this went over with the public. This went over with Ike, took me back, and my critics would call me unctuous, which means oily. So, here I am at the Republican National Convention in '52 accepting the nomination, and we were up against Stevenson in '52. We beat him, and I learned the ropes. '56, we beat him also. And as vice president, I had to take over some responsibilities when Eisenhower had a mild heart attack and a stroke. I was the first American diplomat to go to Japan to smooth things over after the war. And I got involved in the Civil Rights Act of 1957, where segregation was the big deal of the day. We had to send in troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, 1,000 of them, to protect blacks to be able to go to college. And I took a goodwill tour when I was VP of South America and Central America. Things went well until I went to Caracas, where there was my motorcade was attacked by bottles and rocks. The people were upset. That's because we installed many different puppet regimes in these areas here, in these countries, and we were exploiting the natural resources of the area, like lumber, oil, chocolate, bananas, coffee. And we were taking the profits and product and just paying these people just pennies. So, they were upset. 90% of them lived in poverty and got around by horseback. Also during the late 50s, 59, an American company was putting on an exhibit in Moscow. And I decided to go to it. They wanted to show off the new kitchen appliances like dishwasher, stoves, and refrigerators. And there on the convention floor, I talked to Nikita Khrushchev, the head premier of Russia. And we debated right there on the exhibit floor about the merits of me supporting capitalism and him for communism. I really wanted to tear his head off. And I was secretly envious of him and admired him because he led his troops in World War II to protect Moscow. He was a classic Russian alpha male, would come to the United Nations a few years later, bang his shoe on the podium, and tell the capitalist nations, "We will bury you." No, Nikita, we buried you. Communism would only exist in the Soviet Union for 75 years, to 1992 and went kaput, because you couldn't feed your people. So, hasta la bye-bye, Nikita. 1960, I ran for president, which all vice presidents do. Chose as my running mate Henry Cabot Lodge, the senior senator from Massachusetts. Went to all 50 states to campaign there. No one's ever done that. My adversary would be John F. Kennedy, Jr. Senator from Massachusetts, and his running mate, Lyndon Johnson, House Speaker, a formidable foe. Everything again went well until October of '60, where we had the first televised debates. And I didn't understand the super importance of TV back then. How it had grown in popularity, and I didn't realize the picture is worth 1,000 words. Whenever I was debating in college or thereafter, well, it was about the merits of a point. But with TV, it was how you come across, your style, how telegenic you are. Well, Kennedy had studied this for a week, was tanned, relaxed. I, on the other hand, was coming off a hectic schedule, coming off a cold, didn't wear any makeup, had a gray suit on, and had stubble here, and I didn't come across very well. I learned an important lesson from this about TV. In the general election, he beat me. 303 electoral votes to my 219. I conceded the race, but could have contested it because Mayor Daley of Chicago had thousands of dead people voting. Actually, I was jealous of JFK because he was handsome, he had the women, and his daddy had money. When people see me, they see themselves. When people see Kennedy, they see who they could be. And then I wrote 6 Prices, a book, and then in '62, after this election, and in '62, I ran for governor of California. I'd be up against Pat Brown, but honestly, it was a lukewarm idea, a half-hearted event for me. I was going through the motions. I didn't have my heart and soul in this campaign, and I lost to him, big time. And I blamed the press for this loss, and I said, you don't have Nixon to kick around anymore. After this, we moved in exile to New York City to practice law, Pat and I, and I became a de facto expert on foreign affairs. A year later, I popped up on the Jack Paar show, where I had a musical rendition to play, because I could play 5, I was the most musically talented of all the presidents. I could play 5 different instruments, and my favorite, the piano. And I always realized that music brings people together. And I'm not only happy doing this, it reminds me of childhood ideas. Because that's when everybody in the household got along. When there was music, we all did wonderful together. But when you only play music, you can only play music so long. And then when it stops, cold, harsh reality sets in. '68, President Johnson decides not to run for office again because of a quagmire we were in, a war or a conflict called Vietnam. Thousands of our troops were coming home in body bags, thousands more wounded, tens of thousands were protesting in America, all over the country. There were protest songs, dissidents protesting, acrimony, and because of this, that's why he didn't want to run, in a war that was 7,000 miles away, in a war we didn't quite understand why we were there. So, I saw this as an opportunity, him not coming on the second term, so I consulted with Billy Graham and my family and friends, and I decided to run for president, this time Nixon. And I chose as my partner, running mate, Spiro Agnew, governor of Maryland, and together we wanted to appeal to the silent majority. These were the conservative Republicans out west and out south whose voices were drowned out in all the raucous and craziness of the '60s, all the protesting, all the dissent. And culminating in the 1968 convention in Chicago, where there was a riot, and Hubert Humphrey and Muskie were nominated to go against me. And it'd be a 3-way race in the '68 election. Humphrey standing for unity and responsible leadership, me being dedicated and new leadership, and George Wallace, a segregationist for law and order. And I won. I had 43% of the vote. I got 301 electoral votes, and I won by 500,000 votes. And I became president for 1.5 terms, from January of '69 to August of '74, a period of 68 months. And during that time, we got a lot accomplished, and the gist of what I wanted to say was about those accomplishments, because the president is noted for and remembered for the laws he or she passes, as opposed to nifty slogans and keywords you want to throw around. And just like Forrest Gump, I wanted to catch that ball in the stadium, run out of the stadium with it, run home with it, physically sleep with it, marry it and call it my own, and that's how men deal with sex, women, and power. So, some of my accomplishments, not in chronological order, but in importance for me, was opening up China. Here I am, meeting Chairman Mao. And Pat and I stayed there for a week. This was set up by Kissinger, our Secretary of State. I was treated very well and dealt with primarily with Zhou Enlai, the Premier of China. And so we wanted to open up trade and diplomatic relations. So we exchanged ping pong players teams, and they gave us pandas. And I relaxed my restrictions on the 7th Fleet, and we accepted Red China, actually, and not Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan, which was the false China. And I really wanted to create a wedge. See, the Soviet Union wanted to annex part of China at this time, because they share a common border in the Northeast. And they had the military might to do it. So we elevated, basically, China in status, which is what it is today, with two superpowers, USA and China, and now Russia becoming a third poor cousin. So why would an anti-communist crusader like me deal with this kind of situation? Well, I had to be a pragmatist. Communism is here to stay. I can't go jousting at windmills all day long. I had to collaborate with them. This resulted in trade. In today's world, we import China exports $450 billion worth of products to us. Each one of you has 30 products in your possession made in China. This all led to détente with Soviet leader Brezhnev. He invited me to Moscow, and all détente means is you work together to solve a problem. We have too many nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and we wanted to solve this problem. So we had this SALT talks, strategic arms limitation talks, where we limited missiles to the 72 levels of ICBMs and anti-ballistic missiles, and we worked with the ABM system, anti-ballistic missiles, about launchers and missiles, and we limited them to be about 850 miles from each other. We had to solve this problem. Many of the things I did were small steps, but important steps. In order to start any journey, you need to take a first step. Pat and I made a formidable duo. And then I inherited a nightmare in '68 when I became president, which was Vietnam. And I pledged I wanted to take us out of it. Well, Vietnam had turned into a costly war in terms of lives and in terms of money. At the same time, I wanted to get out of it, I wanted to widen it also. Let's see how this happens. However, I got this letter from 10-year-old, in the middle of this, David Pritchard, who lived in Oak Park, Illinois. He called himself War Child. He said, "Dear Mr. President, my dad, shown here, William Pritchard, is MIA, missing in action. I've only seen my dad twice. My younger sister, Linda, never met him. And my mom, Jocelyn, it's hard to say this, cries at night because she misses her dad, her husband." So David writes, "Please bring our troops back home. We miss our daddies." Got it, David. So let's see how we did this kind of thing. First of all, we started decreasing troops. Even though there were some offenses that the Vietnamese propagated on us, we still fought back, and we still cut down troops. It was an election promise. And I did start a new phase of the war, and I'll explain that in a minute. We called for Vietnamization, which means we would train the South Vietnamese troops to fight the Viet Cong, or the North Vietnamese troops. At the same time, I widened it by bombing Cambodia with Operation Menu. We wanted to disrupt the supply supply chain of the North Vietnamese getting their supplies. So without without congressional action, I did this. Later on, Congress would pass a War Powers Act to have a check and balance on me. But we decided to invade Cambodia. Was the gamble work? Even though we're spending this kind of money? Let's find out. We bombed the bejesus out of Cambodia, spending up to 100,000 bombs in 2 weeks. That kind of bombing, saturation bombing. But when you invade a country, then you own it. So we had a problem with this. We invaded Cambodia, and later on, the totalitarian government came in, Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge, and they killed 1 billion Cambodians because we upset the balance of the country by bombing it to the Stone Age. And the Vietnamese deaths were about 1 million, soldiers and civilians, and with us, we lost 58,000 men. Hundreds of thousands came back wounded, scarred emotionally and physically by this terrible war. In 73, we signed the Paris Peace Accords, were signed, and the U.S. withdrew military forces, and this only would work for a little while, and the South Vietnamese would be taken over by the North, and now they are a communist country. We were afraid of the domino theory back then. That means if one Southeast Asia country falls, the rest will. Korea we divided in half, Vietnam fell, Cambodia fell for a while, Laos is still communistic, but Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, India aren't, and neither is Bangladesh and Myanmar. So we were afraid of that. We're afraid of it today with Ukraine. If the Russians win in Ukraine, it might be the domino effect. They might go after other former Soviet bloc countries. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Latvia. So now we're on good terms with communist Vietnam. Tourists can go there. They're treated well. We have good diplomatic relations. They send to us $150 billion worth of product. Many of you have clothes made in Vietnam. What goes around comes around. Moving on from this, and we really should spend more time on this. It deserves another lecture. We got involved in the space race with the Soviet Union. We pumped $26 billion into the Apollo project, and it worked. We got men on the moon. Here I am calling them on the moon. Here I am visiting them in their isolation chamber. A big accomplishment. So, for me, it's happy spouse, happy house. I'm so proud of my daughters and to be with my wife all the time. On the home front, we talked about the foreign scene, now the home front. I declared a war on drugs. I've had it with hippies with drugs. I've had it with overuse of drugs. So I wanted to make a bill that would help out in this. And I called for pharmaceutical companies to make a list of the companies they sold it to and more rehabilitation seminar situations about that. Who was to head this up? Why, it was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and the king of opioids. So I declared this war, but for the past 52 years, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, has been a failure. This is because we spent $1 trillion over this time on the war on drugs, but it hasn't made that much of a dent. Still, drugs are coming illegally in, and this year alone, America spent $150 billion annually on illegal drugs. What this does is emboldens the cartels in South America and Mexico to make them violent and get away with anything they want. Of the 10 most dangerous cities to live in the world, 7 of them are in Mexico. And this is because of us. They just come to our door. The people are tired of violence in this areas, and they come knocking on our doors to get in. And even with prescription drugs, we still take 90% of the world's drugs are for Americans. And we spend over $400 billion on this. Sometimes your doctors can be pushers. We also, on the home front, established OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. There were just too many workplace fatalities happening in the U.S., thousands. We wanted to cut that down. We needed better safety measures, increased awareness and standards, and increased enforcement of these things. OSHA standards are still in effect today, with people taking breaks, people like wearing earplugs, people being safety measures to ensure their health. I also got rid of cigarette ads on the TV and on the radio. Here's your former president, Ronald Reagan, hustling Chesterfield cigarettes. And we also had a National Cancer Act that I passed. And in my day, 100% of all cancers were incurable. It was a death sentence. Nowadays, 50% are, and that's a good start. I like that. Here I am, singer Pearl Bailey, doing what I like best. And I was a reluctant environmentalist. I really didn't want to get involved in it too much, but Congress pushed me along, even though I had read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. So we created the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, to enforce environmental laws. And we got some significant work done. We wanted to help our air quality with getting rid of the sulfur dioxide in coal. We got rid of the lead in unleaded gasoline, and back around 72 or so. And we tried to limit the amount of carbon monoxide and nitrogen dioxide which comes from cars. Even in this year alone, in the past quite a number of years, 7 million people die from air pollution that have COPD, emphysema, and asthma. And my grandfather had emphysema. That's why it's important to me. So when we have lectures in this club or other clubs about climate change, we're responsible for the air quality, and we are directly responsible for that. We could focus on that too. And I vetoed the Clean Water Act because it was too expensive. So Congress overrode me because the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire. Lake Erie was declared dead, and there were people just dumping all kinds of things in the water. So the Clean Water Act, we spent 52 years now since we've had it, and it helped clean up the confluence of the Kaw and Missouri rivers in Kansas. It used to look like this. Now it's a boating paradise. In today's world, we find BP oil $40 billion for dumping 58 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. And the Flint water crisis, we got involved in this because there was water going through lead pipes. Just this summer, lead pipes have to be replaced, 9 million miles of it, and throughout the whole country with the EPA rulings. We also banning forever chemicals. These are chemicals that are retardants, water retardants, Teflon coatings, etc., to get rid of those. The city of Tampa just put in a new water filtration system to take care of that. But there's still a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, where a whole area the size of New Jersey, there's no life there at all, no fish, no plants, because of all the fertilizer coming in. We also passed an Endangered Species Act of '73, which gave money to the states to be able to take care of species like plants and animals that were endangered. We saved the American eagle, our nation's symbol, the whooping crane, and the American alligator. And we have the Marine Moratorium Act, which helped save part of some of the whales coming in. But we need to take care of the land too. Out here in the villages, the land down south is being raped, and we have a rec center by the name of Aviary Center, named after birds. There's no birds there anymore because there's no trees. There's no trees there around also where the new high school is, for 3 miles in diameter. We need to take care of that. So I say to you, give a hoot, don't pollute, let your outdoor manners show, because my attitude changed over time. Instead of pedantic lectures about climate change, do something. Act. Take responsibility. Don't end up being a cranky old curmudgeon or a bitter old woman about this. Act instead. Okay, lecture over. So, we also passed Title IX, which means that your granddaughter can now be in sports programs, but before they couldn't. So we gave money, so we helped out with this situation. In the Paris Olympics, Half the women who participated got in the Paris Olympics, half the athletes were women, and half the medals we got were by women. We also passed the amendment here to make the voting age to 18. Because if you can handle a gun in Vietnam, then you can go out and vote. 10 million people, 10 million young people were able to do this now, a big voting bloc for us. I also passed the Minority Business Enterprise, which turned into affirmative action to have minorities and women be more involved. Got rid of draft cards. And all this was really part of the new federalism. That means we would give money to states as revenue sharing, and they could do with it, under our guidance, what they wished. This also came in with these ideas, this new federalism came in with Ronald Reagan and his ideas from 1980 to 1988, where he proposed deregulation. That means the best government is the one that governs the least. And his deregulation came in, which stimulated business to be able to be more productive without government intervention, and the trickle-down economics. Did that work for you in the 80s? Did you benefit from that or not? You tell me, did your parents do the same? We also had an energy crisis. OPEC cut us off for a while, so we had Project Independence. We wanted to be more independent, and so we lowered our speed limit to 55. We rationed gas, and we had more oil production. But we couldn't get independent by 1980, which was my goal. Rather, just 2 years ago we were, but we still import this many barrels from OPEC to this day, because we have a problem not only with pills, but with oil addiction. And over time, I got petty, personal, and paranoid about things, and highly suspicious. And I developed an enemies list, up to 40,000 people. Anybody who really disagreed with my ideas, anybody who was against my programs, or humiliated me by being against them. Even actor Paul Newman was on, considered a single honor. I looked him up. He sold $600 million of his products to give us to charity. I think that's commendable. But on the other hand, I had a problem with dissidents. So we employed the Huston Plan, which in 1970, which was a plan to surveil and spy on and maybe thwart dissidents and protesters and anybody causing acrimony and bad vibes in our society. Like Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. We would play dirty tricks on him, and anybody like him. We even wiretapped his psychiatrist's office. So we would play these dirty tricks on people that were dissidents against us. And these dirty tricks would include all kinds of activities, like using the IRS. If I didn't like you, had a problem with you, I'd use the IRS to go over a fine-tooth comb your tax returns. I'd also bug your phone and your bedroom, and would cause major problems by doing this. See, I didn't like this kind of dissidence and bad feelings in my administration. I really wanted happy news, good news all the time. I wanted a Ken doll anchorman to come on and tell you about the wonderful things on TV that we're doing. I wanted a Barbie-headed, bleach blonde to come on and talk about happy news also. Anxiety-free news is what I wanted. Just good news. What, you say? You don't know anything about this? Just take a look at your Daily Sun newspaper. There's nothing going on. How could anything bad happen in the land of milk and honey? So, these dirty tricks, let's be more specific. This Huston Plan, developed by Charles Huston here, was to spy on dissidents. And I had hundreds of men at my disposal. Snap my fingers and work would be done by the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, and I would use campaign finance funds to fund this, or impound funds from other sections that I didn't want to get money for programs. So I would use these as smear campaigns and create an enemies list that would use, like the IRS, to persecute political enemies, and I would use executive privilege to hide these bad manners. So here we are meeting and talking about it. And what groups were I interested in doing this for? To spy on, like the Chicago 7. Any kind of hippie protesters that had a problem with the Black Panther parties, Dr. King. I got something to say to you, Dr. King. I give people freedom, not you. And about the SDS, here I am with J. Edgar Hoover discussing this expansive surveillance of domestic protest movements, which would ultimately do me in by going with this Huston plan, an idea. So I appeared on Rowan and Martin's Laughing, Sakatumi. Here I am with Indira Gandhi on the home, talking with her about getting along with India and with my family. People don't know I was an avid gold bowler. We put in a bowling alley in the basement of the White House. My average is 165. I got it over 200. Pat and I love the bowl. And then in 72, I ran against McGovern and beat him by a landslide. But the problem was, 5 months before that, in June of 72, 5 men from my CREEP committee to re-elect the president, wanted to go into the Watergate complex where the Democratic headquarters were and bug their phones and steal their documents, because we were suspicious. We were paranoid about what they were going to do come the fall election. These men were caught. It was a third-rate bungled attempt. Actually, it was their second attempt because their phone bugs didn't work the first time. So, who was at their arraignment? 2 reporters from the Washington Post, Woodward and Bernstein. I tried to silence these men with hush money, but that didn't work. So I had my aide, John Dean, tell the CIA to obstruct the FBI into looking into this problem. And Woodward and Bernstein would call this affair Watergate, and would get their information from Mark Felt, FBI informant, and it was a real cloak and dagger situation, meeting in parking lots and garages and parking garages, etc. And so the Senate got wind of this and got a special prosecutor. His name was Archibald Cox, to investigate this. Wanted to know what was going on, and it was found out I had a secret tape system in my office that I was using. All conversations were taped, really for my posterity. I was thinking ahead. So Cox wanted to know who did what when, so to find out if either I was guilty about this or innocent about this. And this became blown up over a while, and I didn't want to release any tapes or any transcripts for a while about this. I tried to deny, delay, and stonewall this. I said the whole Watergate thing is nothing but phony stuff. Now they call that fake news. How much did he know? I knew a lot. So I give Archibald Cox, I give him transcripts, which were highly didactic and blacked out. But of course he didn't really want this. He wanted the tapes. But I didn't want to give it to him, because it would imply that I had done something. So he wanted the tapes, and I wouldn't give it to him. And so I tried to fire Archibald Cox. I had my Attorney General try to fire him. He wouldn't. I fired Elliot Richardson, and I fired Ruckelshaus, head of the APA, who wouldn't do it either. It was called the Saturday Night Massacre, because Saturday night's all right for fighting and firing. So we tried to get rid of him. He wanted the tapes. And there was a problem. I rejected their subpoenas for the tapes and papers. I gave them some tapes, but my assistant Rosemary Wood did the Rosemary Wood shuffle and was able to knock out 18 and a half minutes of some important tapes around that time period, some important conversations. This is when I had a press conference and I told public, I am not a crook. I'm an honest man. I earned every penny that I had. So Nixon in the court and the Supreme Court got involved and decided to tell me that I had to surrender the tapes. The jig was up. and these tapes would prove my culpability. In the middle of all this, my Vice President Spiro Agnew had to resign. This is because he was involved in corruption and didn't report filings correctly. And there was a vote to impeach. And I asked the public to end this obsession and get on with the nation's business. People were ready to impeach me because I really caused a problem based on my orders that I had given. Here I am being defiant. I won't quit. Who came in as vice president? Gerald Ford, our House leader. He became the new vice president. And Congress was able to have 3 articles of impeachment against me: contempt of Congress, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. And the Senate was going to go along with this too. So before they took any action, I decided to quit and resign in August of '74. So I resigned my position. You can find this piece of paper in the National Archives about 26 feet from the U.S. Constitution. Here I am leaving the White House, giving my classic hands up signature. And Gerald Ford came up to me as about to leave and said, "Hey, Dick, I'm really sorry about all that this was going on with you. I feel awful about this." And I said, "Hey, this one's on me. It's my responsibility." And I said, "Some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it was my own darn fault." So, there were 26 people actually sent to jail for this, about 40 indicted. You remember the names: James McCord, G. Gordon Liddy, E. Howard Hunt, Sarah Greddy, part of the burglars team and part of my staff. John Mitchell was head of this, was Attorney General. Jim Stewart Magruder, Maurice Stans. You remember other names, like Dwight Chapman, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, part of my staff, Gordon Liddy, John Dean, we talked about Jeb Magruder, and E. Howard Hunt. So there were 26 aides sent to jail because of this, 40 indicted. I was granted a pardon by President Ford a month later after I left office. This set off a firestorm because in '76, he ran for president and Carter beat him. The reason why? People thought the fix was in. And the system was rigged to go this way. I should have been held accountable for what I had done. So the changes made afterwards, Congress passed laws like the Privacy Act, the Budget Act, the Election Campaign Act, and we'll go over these, Freedom of Information Act, which allows any person the right to obtain federal agency records. There had to be more transparency, more openness about what was going on in government, because we lost something and had to make up for it. So let's talk about the Privacy Act. If you're going to get, someone wants information, there had to be transparent and have protocol to it with authority, purpose, routine, and disclosure about it. With straight, honest, forward, direct communication. And the Fair Campaign Practices Act, we would limit contributions from individuals and corporations. The Sunshine Act, it opened up things on the state level, and Ethics in Government Act. And about impoundment. Sometimes I didn't like the way there were certain programs that I opposed. So I didn't like it, I wouldn't pay them. And I might use the money for other things, you're just not paying them at all. And they stopped that because I had too much control. This then passed the power to really Congress, which has held that power for 50 years. The transfer of status and importance was transferred over to Congress. And the Foreign Intelligence Service Act, it prohibited surveillance against U.S. citizens. You had to have a warrant, and still do to this day. This was made in '78. Reforms were made to the CIA. This was about really bugging your phone, what we can get away with, and now we can't. And in '77, David Frost interviewed me, paid $600,000 for 4 televised interviews. And I said about that Huston plan, which is the key behind everything that I did. Well, when the president does it, it's not illegal. Okay, because I was trying to preserve the Constitution and the nation, trying to get rid of dissent and acrimony and problems and protesting. To hell with the checks and balance system, it doesn't work. So, because of that, this famous phrase, when the president does it, is not illegal, people for the next number of decades would call me an arrogant SOB, a real DICK head. So, I said, sticks and stones, fine, you want to have that, fine. However, over time, some of these laws have been eroded and washed away. Our moral integrity campus has been broken and altered. Now, corporations and individuals can give unlimited amounts. Musk just gave $1 million into Trump's campaign, $100 million. What goes around comes around. So the Supreme Court this summer said, presidents are absolutely immune from persecution when carrying out their core constitutional powers. That means when I sneeze, it's a constitutional power. I can do anything I want. I have a get-out-of-jail-free card. I have carte blanche because of this and immunity. And about this private conduct stuff, well, if I have any private conduct that's not really legal, I just go appellate court shopping. I just search around for courts that will dismiss my case, reduce charges, or vacate it, or just simply delay it. I get away with anything. So, I came back about in the late 70s and early 80s and became an elder statesman. I went to communist countries like China, like Russia, and talked to, Soviet Union, and talked to Gorbachev, as well as Southeast Asian countries to try to persuade them to come back to democracy. And here I am I had a full schedule going to symposiums, lectures, giving speeches all around the world for a number of years. I also wrote 10 books in my lifetime, of course, all bestsellers. I had a house in San Clemente, one in Key Biscayne, and at my presidential library in Yorba Linda with dioramas, with full-scale dioramas, and 52,000 square feet, where we have 47 million documents and 3,700 hours of tapes. And I remember back in the day, Pat said, why don't you just burn the tapes, Nick? I said, no, it's part of my legacy, and still is. So, the hundreds of thousands of people who come to see this place, my museum and library, I died in April of 1994 at age 81 from a stroke. We are interred here, Pat and I, at the Presidential Library, close to my boyhood home. Here's our gravesites. So, the firestorm I created afterwards was even worse than some of the laws I broke, because I ruined your faith in democracy. There is a disturbance in the force, is right. When I was vice president, 78% of you thought the government was on track. That means they did the right thing most of the time. This all eroded over time because of Vietnam War and Watergate, and now it's fluctuated, and now is at 20%. Many people do not trust the government. They've been lied to, misled about our involvement with other countries, about what we're doing, the spying that I had on. Do you trust the federal government? Do not trust 63%. All we trust is 23% in historic lows. And the polls show up the same way for the Congress. Their Congress rating is the same as a used car salesman at 15% barely. Worst Congress of your life? Supreme Court also is the same way. It used to be near 60%, now is in the dumps. How low can you go? Who do you trust anymore? And right now, there is cynicism, distrust, acrimony in our society, discontentment, and grievances. We are in a cold civil war. We are now broken down to tribes. And the tribes are you're either with us or against us. You're either all in or nothing at all. You're either conservative or liberal or red state or a blue state. You're either urban versus rural, pro-life or pro-choice, no gays, yes gays, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, pro-gun, anti-gun, a hawk or a dove. And the three men I admired most, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, all took the last train to the coast because that is the day civility died. There's no more civility anymore. You go to a club, you have to avoid certain people because you don't want to talk about politics. You have to avoid your brother-in-law because he went over the line and did something, and it's crazy. Same with the cousin you have. You avoid people, have to talk in code, are a little bit anxious and fearful of what to say the wrong thing, and you get into World War III with anybody. This is not the way to live. This is not happy anymore. It's just plain discontentment. And we see that out here in the villages, and baby, it's in your face. Waving your banner all over the place, singing, we will senior moment you. And it's about entitlement, because the administration says you can't do anything here, and then people go elsewhere with their money. So I took an oath. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. I took that oath of office on a Bible in front of people. So I created the biggest scandal in American history because I broke the law. I fought the law and I lost. I did not ensure domestic tranquility, people holding hands, because I was so busy interested in trying to get rid of and spy on my political enemies. So I'm on the list of America's worst presidents, now the dubious list, and all those laws that we talked about that I came here to tell you about, they've been erased in people's minds. Shot through the heart, and you're too blame. I gave politics a bad name. So, yes, I could have had it all, and thank you. That is the end of this.